Hi, Robin. Thank you so much for willing to do this. And it's totally fine that we're doing it this format. It's actually pretty interesting and not something that I really thought of before. And also, thank you for thanks to your husband for willing to compile this together because I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm kind of good at technical stuff, but not to that degree. So I guess we can start with how you got into the professional music industry and how it led up to you recording your Sweet Talk album and your interactions with Luther Vandross and Irene Cara singing backup on that album and what your opinion is on it and on your cover of Hello It's Me specifically, which I think is amazing. And there's a lot of people I see on the YouTube comments of the video that they think it's the best cover of that song that's ever been done.
Hi, Chris. It's nice to meet you, or should I say virtually meet you? It's not exactly the dawning of the age of Aquarius, but this is the way we have to do things now in this horrific time of a pandemic and so many things just going upside down. But I'd like to answer some of your questions the best that I can and how I got started. And, well, if I started at the very beginning, we'd be here for like 4 hours just on my first answer. So we'll skip forward to past high school, where, of course, most kids who are in the arts really they try to get their feet wet right there with talent shows and such. I think it was about 1977, I want to say. A really good friend of mine, his name is Guy Marshall, who's a guitar player, and we've written songs together, and we actually grew up together. Found an ad in the Village Voice that said, production company looking for artists for a real record deal. So I wouldn't have seen that, but he saw it and he said, we were in a band together, I should add that in, a top 40 band where I gathered most of my chops when I was a kid. And he said, let's go down and check it out. And mind you, let me backtrack just 1 second. He actually sent in a demo on a cassette tape. I had no knowledge of this. It was probably of a live performance that we did, and I was probably singing a Debbie Boone song. Who knows? And he got a phone call, and then he told me, and so we went down to this little company in Brooklyn called Aria Productions, and I sat and talked to them, and they listened to my tape in front of me, and they said, "Do you want a record deal?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." And it was really as simple as that. So we started to write, and we started to pull things together. And lo and behold, Kenny Lehman, who was the producer, uh, he, he just he just yanked it out of, he yanked me out of obscurity and childhood basically and into this record deal that came out in 1979 called Sweet Talk. And let me just try to think about this for a minute. During that time and leading up to and a little bit after, we also did a Broadway show which was failed on its opening night, which is where I met Irene Cara. Uh, that was called Got to Go Disco. Oh, dear God. It's not that it was horrible. It's just that I, of all people, did not belong in a Broadway show. It's laughable. So I don't even know how that came to be, other than I felt like I had stepped in, as they say, for good luck, you step in shit. Yep. Okay. Bird poops on your shoulder. You're in. So I must have had both of those things happen to me. And in terms of the Sweet Talk album, that was where, and I believe Irene is the one who pulled Luther Vandross into it, and some of the people that were in the show were also incorporated into it, and I guess that would have been Kenny Lehman's doing. And the album just progressed from there. It was a disco album. I really wasn't a disco artist. I don't even know what kind of an artist I was going to be. I kind of classified myself more as a top 40 pop slash light rock artist because I hadn't really sewn all my chops yet, and I didn't really know. So it kind of fell into the herd of doing the disco light kind of singing, a little bit of white soul. And in writing those songs and collaborating with Kenny Lehman, I also always had a passion for Todd Rundgren, and I really wanted to do one of his songs. And of course, it wound up being Hello, It's Me. So he did the arrangement, and I just went in there and I just actually sang it the way I felt it. I loved the song. I did it. I classify it now as being just a little bit on the immature side of how a song like that should be approached, because it was just such a classic and iconic song that I appreciate that everybody loves my doing, but I don't think I did it justice. But I do appreciate that I did it at all and I was allowed to do it. That was the most miraculous thing of all. And I got through it. And I do like it, so don't get me wrong. Working with Luther and working with Irene was nothing short of an amazing pleasure. I was not a huge fan of either one of these people. I met them in the industry that way as just singers. Irene was emerging, and she had some things happening, but she had not yet done Fame. And Luther was just this great session singer that I had met through Kenny Lehman, but then we intertwined in other ways. But he was emerging big time. The nicest person, the most accommodating, a great teacher, and very funny and very lovable guy. Irene, she's a few years younger than me, and she was very straightforward, very serious, very cool, and somebody that I really wanted to, stand next to, because she was younger than me by, I think, 4 or 5 years. But we got along so good, and you could say literally that I slept at her house, and her parents, one of her parents was there at the time, her mom, and literally her mom might call my mom and say, "Do you know where those girls are?" But that brings me to just the total finale of that album. I think it went somewhere up into like 14, or I actually don't know the number on the charts, but it hit the American charts. I think Sweet Talk did the cover song, not cover song, excuse me, I said that wrong, the title cut, which I co-wrote. I think it was 14. I just want to say that's as high as it got. And then, like all things, and I seem to always just slip in right as the music is going to change from one style of music to another, which becomes important at the time. I think that was a pretty long answer for what you asked, but to sum it up, I've been singing on kitchen tables since I'm 2 years old, and I think if I don't break the one that I own now, I'll get back up on that tonight, because there's nowhere else to perform.
And then I know right after your Sweet Talk album, then you were a background singer on albums by Ron Dante, Carolyn Mass, the Dukes. Then obviously you did a lot with Melissa Manchester, and I was wondering what the stories were behind that, if there are any that stand out in your mind. And then for David Bowie, too, on the Labyrinth soundtrack.
Yeah, I feel really lucky. I mean, after doing the Sweet Talk album, a lot of singers knew who I was, and I was recommended to be in other group sessions, sometimes recording background for people that I really didn't know. And, you're in and you're out in that industry. You do, if you're worth your salt, you're not holding up the session. And the sessions generally would run for background singing 1 to 3 hours. But believe me, they want you out of there as soon as possible. I worked mainly for artists that were emerging, that like I said, I didn't really know very well, but this is how I got my feet wet, and this is how I really learned how to be in a group setting. And eventually, I wound up working for Arif Mardin, who met me through an old ex who was a fine player, and he had worked for so many greats. It's unbelievable and inconceivable how wonderful he is still to this day. And he kind of helped me to shuffle into that industry. And I wound up working for Leo Sayer, not for Leo Sayer, but I did backgrounds for Leo Sayer, Melissa Manchester, and George Benson. I ghosted backgrounds, so I don't actually have a credit for Shaka Khan because I've looked for it a million times. And since Arif is not here with us anymore, it's a little hard to say, hey, can you like throw this on my biography somewhere in Wikipedia? So I don't get credit for a lot of the things I did. I also was locked into a songwriter. His name was Jeff Kent, who introduced me to Ellie Greenwich, and Ellie Greenwich then to Ron Dante, and then from Ron Dante to Joey Levine, and so many people who did like those sort of songs. Like I think, was it Ron Dante who did, or was it Joey who did Sugar Sugar? They each had that kind of a song. I think you know what I'm talking about. Feel free to interject the right titles when I forget. I'm really dating myself. They weren't very long and involved relationships. I would do something here and I would do something there. Mostly for Joey Levine, I was more into the jingle side of things, but we did try to do some original songs together. In fact, we were thrown together. It was me and Lonnie Groves, who sang with Stevie Wonder on You Are the Sunshine of My Life. She was the female vocal, and believe me, that's not all she did. She was amazing. And she became one of my closest friends and allies. And like I said, the recommendations to do those things, they were never ending. So to write into this comment how many people I sang backgrounds for, like Carolyn and FM, and just it boggles my mind. If I would take out a piece of paper and write a list, then I could tell you, and maybe we can have another interview about that sometime. But hundreds of artists that I don't claim on a Wikipedia. It seems a bit run into the ground. Oh yeah, let me not forget one of the most important artists that I work with, and I still hear myself on the radio with it all the time, is Cher. And it's a bunch of background singers, just called in by Desmond Child. Of course, this is after, and you'll probably get to that later in this interview. Called me in to sing on If I Could Turn Back Time, which I wish was my song, and she got it first. But that was a wonderful experience for me. And no, I never met her in a session, but I did meet her outside the studio. And she is as charming in person as she is behind the scenes. And I'm sure you've read somewhere that I did backgrounds on the Labyrinth album for David Bowie. And it was also a duet. So there you go. And I was very friendly with Carmen Rojas while he was playing background, and Alan Childs, who was the drummer for the Glass Spider tour. And I did get to meet him because I didn't meet him on the session either. And there's so many that I would like to mention, but this was memorable to me because, not because well, wait a second. I'm forgetting about a whole nother section of my life where David Bowie is concerned. I think that has something to do with the 80s and the stigma there. There were parties that, many celebrities would gather at a friend's house who was a little deeper into the business than me. And I can remember many times being in the same room with David, just hanging out with him and his manager, and, hanging out and just talking and relaxing and doing what we did back then in the 80s. And I was, it's funny because he's such a normal person, and you didn't get that feeling like you were in the presence of greatness. And maybe that was a good thing, because then I didn't act like I was all goo-goo or whatnot. But oh my goodness, there's just so many artists. And I feel so privileged because I hung out with people like Julian Lennon as well, who he was a kid really doing the lot when I met him. And we all just wound up in a crowd of popular artists and players, and we used to hang out at this place called the China Club in New York, which is a whole nother book we can write. But we had a lot of fun. We played, we sang, I don't think we ever went out before midnight, and I'm pretty sure we never got home before dawn, or even later than that, maybe even into the middle of the next day. But fun, 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 and I'm still here to talk about it. That's the good news.
And when I was talking to Desmond Child, when I brought up your name and I relayed your message, he said that one of the stories he said about the recording of the album was Steve Lukather. He was playing a guitar solo on one of your tracks, and Desmond said that you didn't like it, and you told Steve that, and then Steve walked out of the studio
Oh my God.
and refused to come back, and Desmond had to chase him down in the parking lot, and he just wouldn't want to come back. That's what Desmond said.
Oh, yes. I remember that was me. And yes, Desmond got up from the console and chased Steve down the hallway. And they had a tussle in the parking lot, right. And then it occurred to me, if he didn't come back in, I would have to hire a new guitar player. And I think, as I recall it, I did. And it was Eric Clapton, yes. And then I don't remember any of this. This is so funny. But thanks for the memory, Desmond.
And then at that, then that would have been 88, 89. So how did you acquire the deal for the Trouble or Nothing album, and whose decision was it to do the different cover songs that were on it? Your experience meeting and working with Desmond, how your vocal style changed in between that period between Sweet Talk and Trouble or Nothing, and if you have a preference of singing rock music or R&B music.
Yeah, well, I kind of slid from the recording industry proper, like being an artist in my own name, to doing background sessions mainly, and then into the jingle business, as I mentioned earlier in one of your questions. So one of the jingle houses that I worked for was called Tom Anthony, and there were a few songwriters for this one particular jingle for Coca-Cola. I didn't know at the time, but I can tell you now it was for the UK mainly. And they presented it to me. I had originally done it as a jingle, and then they decided, we're getting a lot of requests on radio. This is secondhand information that I'm getting, maybe even third, that they felt like the reaction to it in the UK was, who's that singer, and is there a longer version, and blah, blah, blah. Whatever it was, it led to me doing a longer version that Gavin Spencer and Tom Anthony wrote. And I just went in as a regular session, and I sang it, and Jim McCurdy produced the vocal on it, engineered the vocal, and got me through it, because, when you do something as a jingle, it's a hard time to imagine, how do you turn this into how do you be yourself? How do you really just be an artist rather than following the notations and the notes just as a jingle? So, I didn't struggle with it, but I kind of didn't think it was going to go anywhere. I just said, oh, this is fun. It's kind of rock and roll, and it's a little bit more towards the style that I do more naturally. So I did it, and I left, and it wasn't long before that I got a phone call, literally in the middle of the night, and I thought it was a phone call coming from an old friend, Steve Ferroni, who is a very famous drummer. You may have heard of him, and Eric Clapton, and blah, blah, blah. And there's too many people to mention, as I always say. He is phenomenal. And I got this phone call from this Mr. Watson up at Polygram in the UK. And mind you, Polygram is also sister to Mercury in the United States. So now I'm on my second part of the family. And anyway, the conversation kind of went like this. How would you like to come to England and do, or rather the UK, and do Top of the Pops? Well, in the first place, I had no idea what Top of the Pops was. I found it out later, and then I really got scared. And I said, Steve, stop fooling around. And he said, excuse me? And it wound up being the phone call that you only see in movies, right? Somebody calls you and says, hey, you just have a hit record. Well, the song was already climbing up the charts, and I believe it was about to hit number one on this proposed day that I arrive in the UK to do Top of the Pops. And it was a mad dash to get any kind of an image and some clothing and to figure out how to do it and rehearsal and being in a country I went by myself. I think my financial manager at the time had met me there, and I got sick the minute I got there, which was a nightmare. I got a really bad cold, and I was in bed, and then there was a lawyer who came up to visit me and kept me company, and blah, 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 and this goes insane all over the place. Is one of those stories that you hear, from rags to riches, basically. So the song goes off the charts. It stays at number one and then starts going all around Europe. And unfortunately, it didn't work in the U.S. And I kind of feel the reason for that is because it didn't have the amount of promotion that the jingle had to set it up in the beginning. But that's how I got the record deal, and that was the original question. I got the record deal because of the jingle that Tom Anthony and Gavin Spencer and a guy named Terry Boyle from the ad company had written, and Jim McCurdy had engineered and helped to produce. And there, I hope I gave everybody the credit because there are so many people that have a hand in making these things happen. So forgive me if I don't mention every name, but everyone deserves the credit, even more than I do. And this leads me to the new record deal for Trouble or Nothing. And we had a lot of producers in the hat, and I remembered when I did Sweet Talk that Desmond Child and Rouge were in another studio at that time doing their album. And I remember listening through the walls, and I remember meeting him. And also, I guess it's not ironic, he became the biggest songwriter in the world at the time. And I had an advantage to pick whoever I wanted to. So in the beginning, I was very friendly with this gent and a great producer, Neil Kernan. And we were going to do an album with him, but that for some reason or another didn't work out. We're still friends. It has nothing to do with me. Neil, if you hear this, I love you. You're the best and the most creative of anybody I've ever met. That's right. And now on to the next person. You're the greatest and you're the most creative of anybody I've ever met, and so on. But Desmond really was the most creative person and just somebody that you would idolize, even if you never got to work with him. Getting to the songs, I went out to LA and I sat with Desmond and I sat with Diane Warren, and we previewed songs and reviewed songs and tested this and that. And some of them I understood were recorded but didn't do anything. And so I was asked if I wanted to do them. And since I never heard of them, and when I Googled them, I really didn't, not Google them, when I researched them in whichever way back in 1989 that you could. And I guess by saying that, I would have to say that would have been just looking on the backs of albums and checking it out and whatnot. So retracting that, what the age we live in now just really has just seamlessly gone as a thread, like it's always been that way your whole life since the day you were born. The internet, no, but there was no internet. But anyway, we reviewed the songs, and the ones that suited me best, which were the ones that I did, were the ones that were selected. I did come to find out that many of them were done by artists that just did the most slamming rendition of these songs that were either written by Diane or written by Desmond or Billy Steinberg and Tom Kelly. And I wrote a couple too, and suffice to say, nobody recorded my songs first, but the experience that I had was it was a huge growing experience because it was all on me. Yet at the same time, I felt like I was in this protective bubble. I got this record deal without even trying. It just came to me. And so I guess I've been practicing what you put out there is what comes back to you. It's sort of the secret. And I've focused on it my whole life. I did make one huge mistake in that when you're making wishes, don't wish small. Because I used to always say, all I want is just one hit. Just one hit. And that's what I got. Just one hit. The others were hits too, but they never reached number 1. 2, 4, 7, 11, and so on. But the number 1 hit first time is the one that really broke my career open in Europe and other places throughout the world. And my work has continued ever since. And that's my little story about that.
And I guess the last thing would be if there's any music industry stories you have about meeting people early in your career, or since I know you were in New York, if you ever encountered Pat Benatar, because I know that she was the same time her Sweet Talk album came out was when Heartbreaker and her debut album was coming out. Yeah, so the last thing could be any stories relating to music industry people that you have.
Boy, do I have stories. But I think I would probably lose just about every single friend I ever had if I were to tell even one, because this is the 80s. I'm going to just keep on reminding you. I did not meet Pat Benatar. She was a few years before me. Who I met was the amazing Fiona Flanagan. She is just, she's a star. She was a star then, she's a star now, and she's a dear friend of mine. I have met so many people. The stories aren't as important as the feeling that all of these artists left me with, which is nothing but pure love and respect. So run the list down of all the musicians that have ever played on any of my records. Run the list down of anywhere you can find my name on the back of an album, and anyone that I have met in those circumstances and outside of them with artists that were connected to them. Artists are very special people. They're all unique and they're all colorful and very real. More real in a way to me than I can describe to you through an incident, a story, a gossip chain, or anything like that. So we'll leave it at that. Artists are incredible and unique, and everybody has a story. I should mention that when I was doing my album in 1994 called Can't Get Off, nobody really knows what that means. I have no idea why I titled it that. It's not what you think. But we lived in a house. It was Peter Gabriel's studio. And I lived in a cottage on the grounds. And at the same time, there was Ginger Baker there and Jack Bruce. And I didn't meet Peter Gabriel, but here's the story about Ginger Baker sitting at the dinner table and meeting him as we all sat around and ate. He was this incredible guy, and he told me stories about his vineyard where he handled olives. And I don't know exactly where that was anymore. I don't remember if it was in Italy or I actually, or maybe it could have even been in the UK. I don't know. Do they have olive vineyards or gardens in? I don't even know. So stupid me. But the story goes is that I wanted to touch his hands. And so he allowed me to touch his hands. And man, were they like really just filled with calluses and bumps and everything. And that's how I came to find out that he was, into this olive orchard of his own that he owned. And sitting with him and also with Jack Bruce, you would not believe. I mean, I've heard some amazing stories about both of them, and I was a little bit afraid. Two of the nicest people on the face of this earth, okay? So, telling a story about someone, I think you should always only end on a high note, and this is the high note for meeting Ginger Baker in particular. I went to a horse race. And that was so much fun. And on the ticket, it gave you all the names of the horses, and there was a horse named Ginger. And I don't know what I had. I might have had a couple of 100 pounds in my pocket. And I said, what the hell? And, I just chose Ginger to come in first. And I walked away a winner, just like Ginger Baker. Great story. And I want to thank you, Chris, for going along with this kind of a setup to do this interview. Strange times indeed. And it was a complete pleasure, even though we were texting more than we were doing this interview for the last couple of weeks. I just want to wish you well, stay safe, and get the message out there that we're all going to be all right, and we're all coming back strong, not to worry. This is one of those things that I guess every 100 years or so, somebody's got to go through it. But we're a strong family in the music business, and although we're hurting right now and things are being ripped away from us and there are no venues for us to play, well, we are thankful for people like you who keep our names alive and let us say what we want to say. And even the virtual concerts that are not my preference, and I think a lot of people have kind of feel like that's a little played out, now we need to get back to work. But I feel really confident that we're going to come out of this okay, and it's going to be the biggest party. Out with 2020 and in with the new year, and let's get over this already.